Hi folks, hopefully you've checked out part 1 of this video where I make the case that the IB 2020 May results are not fair and reliable for all students. For the record, I am not saying that no one got appropriate scores. Lots of people got scores that are indicative of their ability. I am, however, saying that there are also a great many students who did not get scores that represent their ability. Now, I know lots of people are going to disagree with me and say that the IB scores are fair and reliable across the board for May 2020. And in this video, I want to deal with 3 of those counter-arguments. Before we get to that, though, I just want to reiterate that I think that this year, post-secondary institutions should strongly consider the predicted grades along with the IB final grades when making decisions about admissions. Okay, counter-argument number 1. Predicted grades and final grades are both unreliable attempts to predict the future. A lot of people are going to say that the 2020 IB grades and the 2020 predicted grades are both just shots in the dark, so why bother making a distinction? But I think there is a distinction to be made here that gets at the heart of the credibility of these grades. Teacher-predicted grades are based on that individual student's work, and should therefore be taken seriously. IA marks, both raw and moderated, are based on that individual student's work, and therefore should be taken seriously. The algorithm that takes a predicted mark of 4, and an IA mark of 5, that's moderated, and somehow produces a final grade of 2, should be taken not with a grain of salt, but probably with a bucket of salt. And again, this isn't happening to all the scores, but it is happening to some. Counter-argument number 2. This only happens if students were over-predicted. So some people are going to say that these big differentials are only occurring at schools where last year there was a big discrepancy between predicted and actual achieved final marks. And honestly, I don't have the data to tell you whether or not that's true. But let's suppose it is. One might be tempted to then extrapolate that this year's students really had it coming anyways, since last year's students didn't hold up well under the pressure of exams, or maybe they were over-predicted. But that's a pretty fatalistic view of individual achievement. I love the Greek myths, but I don't believe that anyone spun the thread of students' lives and fated them to a certain IB mark. Despite being well prepared, some students hold up well on exam day, while others are overwhelmed. But most importantly, this year's students, and possibly the person who determined their predicted grade, are different people from last year's students. And using someone else's performance to assign your grades is just weird. And let's face it, if 2020 had one lesson for us, it might be that 2019 was not a good predictor of what 2020 would be like. As an aside, historically, the main function of predicted grades was never for assigning IB final grades. Instead, it was to flag students who ended up 3 marks or more from their predicted, and it ensured that those students, their assessments got an automatic second look. In other words, it was just a built-in safety valve for fairness. Counter-argument number 3. Without the algorithm, the world average would go up. And it's implying here that that would decrease the value of an IB diploma. And I think this actually really gets to the heart of the matter. The fact that the world average stayed basically unchanged, despite having next to no student work to base it on, speaks to the algorithm's priorities. Just let that sink in for a second. Despite having next to no work from this year's students, the average barely changed. At the same time, a lot of final marks varied quite a bit from the only actual piece of work that students submitted, their moderated IAs. It's pretty confusing to get the word from the IB that your work that you submitted was pretty good, and still you're going to get assigned a pretty bad grade. The IB values its reputation of fighting grade inflation very much, so their algorithm generated a world average that was in keeping with previous ones. And it did this because, at least implicitly, that was part of its job. It works on the assumption that students in your class this year will do about as well as the students at the same school did last year, or at least vary from predicted to about the same extent. And at first glance, that can be a really compelling idea, at least for a class average. But it's also kind of uncomfortably close to simply assigning grades based on where you go as opposed to the individual work that was submitted. It also brings up issues around schools without historical data, around yearly variation in student ability, around staff changes, and also around generalizing from small samples, because often IB classes are fairly small, and these algorithms are down to a school-by-school, course-by-course basis. And again, most importantly, using past cohorts to assign 1,000,000 correct individual scores is impossible. I'll reiterate that exactly how the algorithm works is beside the point, though the IB could easily lift the veil on that. What is not up for debate is that it uses last year's classes to assign marks to this year's individuals. So I'm sure I've already belabored this point too much, and I know that there are many students who got scores that were either fair or like within one standard deviation of fair. But I think that it's important that everyone knows that there are also many students who, through no fault of their own, got scores that do not reflect their competence, and that some of their post-secondary doors have been shut as a result. That's why I'd urge post-secondary institutions to have a look at predicted marks as well as final IB marks this year. Yes, the word from IBO is that the final grades this year are fair and reliable. But for the reasons I've outlined in this video and the last, I think there's reason to be skeptical of that assertion, at least as a blanket statement for everyone. For students, if you did well this year and your marks reflect it, congratulations on your achievements. If you did well this year and your marks don't reflect it, congratulations on your achievements too. I know it's not always easy to deal with, but I assure you that your IB marks are not what will ultimately determine your success in life. Persevere, because the world needs conscientious and dedicated people. Oh, and here's my favorite stats joke. 3 statisticians go out rabbit hunting, and they see one. The first statistician shoots 1 foot to the left. The second statistician misses 1 foot to the right. The third statistician jumps up and yells, "We got him!"